Hi, welcome back to Endtalkers. I'm Eliozean Archives.
And I'm Niniri.
Okay, Niniri. Not that the last episode wasn't particularly dark, but we've got a little ways to go into the depths of despair before we find ourselves on the other end of hope.
Yes, definitely. The long road to hope that we shall walk.
Yeah. I will say for this section, though, especially how we have had it kind of broken up here, it really does start out at the depths of despair, but it rises into not only what hope is generally, but like the courage to hope with, as we go on, we'll see like Vritra and their relationship with the people of Razat Han.
Right, so we leave Razat Han in an extremely brutal place. We go to the moon, which I feel like there's elements of hope involved in that. And then we come back to Razat Han, it's just straight away hitting you with it again.
And it's much, much, much worse. Yeah, so we return from Razat Han back from Venispati, and we start asking around to discover, like, okay, where did all these creatures come from? Clearly, we know that people are transforming into them, but what was the timeline events? Because we basically find things already on fire by the time we're getting back.
Right, absolutely. And this is obviously the investigation to the blasphemy and is sort of contemporaneous as well. If you're playing the role quest at the same time, which you probably should, I would recommend you do at least one of them. You're at the same point in both of them at this point.
Yeah, and basically towards the tail end of this section is when you unlock them. And it's actually really interesting how much, I don't want to say it hard, but it definitely soft emphasizes that the end of this section is basically the exact midpoint and the turning point for a number of things, let's say.
Yeah, like you said, the turning point from despair into at least the first inklings of hope.
And a plan. And sort of out of, Alfino has a line later, but sort of out of fighting against an enemy that you don't understand, you don't know what their machinations are, towards having a sense of, okay, what exactly is going on so that we're not just fighting blind.
Right. Getting some more information, which of course comes from sort of the indigenous practices of Razat Han at first. We're given some very, very interesting information that I'm sure, knowing you, Elio, set your mind ablaze when you first played this.
Oh, just a tad. Speaking of information, though, I love how we piece together what the heck is going on. We have all these little bits and pieces of fragments of information from Hydaelyn, from Fandaniel, from Nadana with Akasha, but just piecing together what's going on and watching the characters do it is this unfolding of information is good, while also having so much foreboding in the surrounding atmosphere.
Right, exactly. Even in the previous segment, we start to wonder why people are turning into the beast. Because, of course, in Amarat, they weren't. People were not themselves turning into these creatures. Their creation magic instead was going wild and creating creatures similar to what we see here. So the difference in the situation as well is a really interesting thing that you get to dive into and, of course, solve.
And since we're talking on that, let's talk about a little bit in detail, flashing forward as to why that is, and that is because we are Endtalkers. As sundered beings, we are more susceptible and able to engage with Dynamis. And also, we don't have access to creation magics. And so, whereas the flood of the final days of negativity and despair that affected the ancients caused their focus and hopelessness and emotions and all those things to affect their creation magics, thus creating monsters, we instead are just directly affected by those things and transformed. And our etheric forms are obliterated, and only what's left is our despair incarnate.
Right, exactly. And, we're not in, like, necessarily even a better position than them or a worse position than them. I suppose almost an ode to the inevitability of this process, which of course we later subvert.
Yes. Speaking of inevitability, despair, and darkness, Arwan arrives, which I guess that is a moment of hope for the short term. He is awesome. He in a lot of ways, it's kind of like the Samwise to Vritra's Frodo. He accepts where he is. He accepts his position, and not only does so with grace, but he then focuses on doing everything he can to serve his country and to serve Vritra up to the very end. And I just love that just because he's not the real satrap doesn't mean he's not a real leader.
Right, exactly. He's not the ruler of the state per se, but he's, like you said, he's definitely a leader. He's definitely a hero of the country, at least at the end of this particular section.
Yeah, truly. And I love that somehow we've already gone through Venispati and the tension's not released, right? Like, things are still foreboding, things are building, but I love Matzia arrives. And one of the things that I love about that, having replayed Shadowbringers again recently, and I think this is very much true of A Realm Reborn to Stormblood as well, but I love that they take earlier parts of the expansion you've played through and make them meaningful to the primary story later. So what I mean by that is you have in Shadowbringers, for instance, you have all these different characters you meet in the different zones, and what would be one way to do it is just, okay, you're meeting these, doing a couple quests to give flavor for the zone. And it's like, sure, that can be fine, but it can also be a little bit like slow, like, can we get back to like the main crux of what's going on? But because of Shadowbringers, all the relationships you make allow you to build the Talos, right? To get to Mount Gog. Like, making it so that the setup is also, this is going to sound stupid, but the setup is also part of the payoff rather than just setup for setups to set up the world is something that I think they've gotten better and better and better at. And something like Matsuya, who was just a random, like, the fish NPC, vendor NPC, at the very early on, mattering later, rewards you for engaging with every step of the process.
Right, there's actually some really interesting sort of allegories to Hindu folklore that I want to get into with Matsu's storyline later on. That's fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
I love the insights you can provide.
But yeah, no, the world building and the, like you said, the setup, but sort of generally speaking, all of the world building and the effort they put in comes back. Look at the polarity stuff that we did in, which is not to say that wasn't important in Shadowbringers, it was. But look at what it's doing now as we're really diving into these different shards, particularly the void, and what we can carry through with that information we gained back then into this.
Yeah. No, I think I would even say that they have always, even onto ARR, been really good about setting up for the future. Like, ARR has so much set up for Ishgard and Alamigo. Even in the early chapters, you're doing side quests that are really setting you up for understanding those places better, that aren't going to pay off for, malms and malms and malms down the line. But I think what they've definitely really improved on, or at the very least, I think, since Ishikawa has been writing the MSQs with at least Shadowbringers, is making it so that in the short term, the start of the story meaningfully interweaves into moments of catharsis or payoff in later parts of the story.
Right, exactly. I mean, this kind of stuff is all over Endwalker, sorry, but also Shadowbringers. You look in any corner, it depends. No matter what aspect of the game you've invested in, there is payoff. If you've invested in Papalimo, there's payoff in the form of side quests. If you've invested in...
And Aetioscope.
Right, and Aetioscope, of course, also. Aetioscope is just a bouquet of that.
Yeah, I feel like the one place you could argue there hasn't been is what the fuck is the hardest to beat?
Well, oh yeah, I believe one of these days.
I have been deluding myself for so long. I thought Abyssos, we were gonna get, whatever's down there is whatever the entity that was powering the hardest to beat or something. But no, I think we'll get it one day. At the end of the day, it's like, okay, it can just be proper noun or a site with power. I mean, like, if it doesn't have to be a good answer at this point. It just has to be some small answer.
Honestly, I know it's going to annoy people, but give me like a 2-paragraph thing in the next Encyclopedia Eorzean if you're not gonna pay it off in game. Just
yeah. Hey, there's 1 second of pandemonium left. Maybe we'll get something at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I was ride or die for the Heart of Sabik theory, so like, I'm on that train.
So moving on from the fun, let's get into the dour. So the old woman whose, I believe, son is trapped somewhere out near Palakistan and is worried for him, starts to panic, and that is when we see the first transformation, which, to their absolute credit and to my absolute horror, boy, do they make that shot and seem disturbing.
Yeah, you can definitely see they took the successes of the transformation scene in Shadowbringers of Teslin, which certainly people, I'm not going to say loved, but is very impactful for people.
It does what it's supposed to do. You can laud it for being like, yeah, it's upsetting, and it should be.
Yeah, these things have a place in storytelling, a very, very important place. So stuff goes real bad. I mean, stuff breaks bad in the most profound, most disturbing way possible, on a grand scale within the city, particularly within this square, and you can just feel things spinning out of control rapidly.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like it's a good juxtaposition with Teslin, right? It almost feels like time stops, and then there's just this slow unfolding of the nightmare in a single person. Whereas with this, like, the chaos just starts unfolding, and you see, terrible fate after terrible fate, and some people just try to survive, some people transforming. The Scions trying to hold the line. It's a hell of a cutscene.
Yeah, and something I do like is that they revisit Ishtola's horror at the complete nullification of an individual that takes place in this process. It's not just a one-off thing, that they do go back to it in this fight.
Yeah, and I think it would be so much less powerful. It's like, oh, that happened to one person. I think like with Tesleen, it has to be personal because you have to root the horror of what the process of a Sin Eater, becoming Sin Eater is, in someone you can have a connection to. But I think here, to see like on such a grand scale, just the utter nullification of so many people and there's nothing you can do to really stop it. It's simultaneously a very similar scene in how horrific it is, but it serves such a different function. And yeah, it's like saying I love this scene is it's obviously not right or what I mean at all. But I've seen some people criticize scenes like this or scenes like Tesleen as bad because it made them feel uncomfortable. Whereas I think there's a very strong value to having like the world isn't always kind and sometimes it can be cruel. And having that as part of your narrative and contending with it, I think is sometimes a good thing.
It is. Look, I respect if you struggle with these things and if you don't want these things in your fiction, but that is going to bar you from certain types of fiction, and that's fine. And like I said, I respect that people need their space in these regards, but that doesn't mean that all fiction has to be sanitized. It just means it's not necessarily for you, or this part of it isn't for you, and it is what it is.
Yeah. One thing, I guess a light flashing forward in the darkness, I do really love, if you haven't played the Omega continuation quest for post 6.0 content, a lot of the characters that are in this scene show back up, and we get to hear their thoughts about those moments and also how they're trying to carry on. And I really appreciated that, and especially in how the Omega, if you've ever done I believe it was, I don't know if it was during Stormblood, it might have been during Dragonsong War, but you go back through different maps in Heaven's Word and like kind of remember the events that are happening and kind of have like a personal memorial to it. This is like kind of like that, but for Endwalker, and I really, really appreciated that.
Yeah, definitely. Some of the content with that stuff is really solid. And of course, in the ending moments, or not even particularly that, but in the latter ending of this, we bid farewell to a short-lived but very valuable character.
Yeah. Arwan goes down being a hero, believing in Vritra to the end. And also, bad way to go, though.
Not a good way to go. Yeah, he goes down believing in Vritra, like you said, and Vritra believes in him, of course, to the end. And even in later content, even in patch content, he is still, Vritra will still pay homage to Arwan, which is deserved, I think. He's a good guy.
Yeah. And the thing that I love is you can do a lot with a character who's not around a bunch just by like good characterization, and to be frank, sometimes just also making sure that they're voiced.
Yes. This I mean, I'm sure that I would have adored Endwalker, even if it had like Shadowbringers, or just let's say even if it had like Stormblood level voicing, or even ARR, like the extremely rare voicing in that kind of content. But the voicing adds so much to this expansion, and it's so well done, and it's so expanded, which isn't something that's only just started. They've been building that up, and then it has a huge leap forward in Shadowbringers, and then an enormous leap forward even from that in this expansion.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at pound for pound the amount of voicing that's done, it is, yeah, exactly what you said. Just it is a leap forward, and it's funny because at face value, it's like, oh, I think Endwalker has quite a bit more, and then I actually compared them one for one, and the thing that gets, because there's lots of cutscenes in Endwalker there that are unvoiced, and you're like, oh, maybe it's not that much more than Shadowbringers, but the thing is that there's so much more dialogue in Shadowbringers that if you compare the hour for hour, there's so much more voice acting in Endwalker compared to Shadowbringers, which is crazy.
And it's consistently really good.
Yeah. And speaking of Shadowbringers, I also want to point out, and I really love this moment, G'raha Tia's moment of going into Exarch mode. And not just because it's badass, but because I love in that moment, he recognizes what's needed and he switches his energy, his posture change. He holds his staff like he holds the Exarch staff. He switches how he holds his own staff and like stands it in the ground and then commands people. And the voice acting is modulated. Like the voice actor is modulating their performance to be much more different energy. And it goes back to that point I think I've talked about elsewhere. I think I have it here as well, but that you really have to see the Exarch and G'raha as in some ways different characters, and this is like a really clear distinction there.
Right, there's three characters in that space, right? There's G'raha, there's Exarch, and then there's G'raha now, which is of course sort of a gestalt, which is related to both, obviously, but different. And like you said, the the team in this expansion and also in the final patch of Shadowbringers, they must love Graha, or they must be using him as proof of concept, probably both, because they really put so much effort into his physicality and his characterization through non-vocal means, of course, also through vocal means and through dialogue. Like you said, his voice modulates, but as much as it's memed on, the ears, the burger, but even in more serious context, they are really investing energy in showing us Graha's sort of internal dialogue and his characterization and how he reacts to things through his physicality, not just through what he's saying.
Yeah, and what I've noticed, I think, a second or third time around with Endwalker the most is the level to which Estinian also gets not as much, but some of that treatment, which I wonder if then that's partly that you think about Graha and Estinian being the newest members, if that's also partly to make sure that they are concreted as having a space to belong, as being caught up with everyone else in terms of development. Now, to be fair, I don't know that you needed extra effort, because I think after Shadowbringers and Heavensward through Shadowbringers for Estinian, for those two, they're already good to go, but...
I mean, yeah, coming out of Shadowbringers, Graha was a fan favorite, of course. Very much a fan favorite, but I almost think, and this is an idea that just occurred to me, I could be completely wrong, but I almost think that they took a look at characters like Kryl. So Kryl enters the scenes, she's a good character. She's a much better character now, I think, but they take her off the board pretty quickly, and she's gone for quite some time through the stuff with Xenos and all of that. And it takes Kryl a little while to take off from that, to entrench herself in a hut. So it's not really until I liked the character, but it's not really until her stuff with Hydaelyn in this expansion that really entrenches Kryl as, as a scion to me. She felt like a B-lister, but now she's creeping into that A-list.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And if you don't personally agree if she was always, top tier, or even if she still doesn't mean much to you, I would just say at the very least, if we use us as a litmus test, I'm sure there's at least quite a few people. And my experience has been that most people are pretty much in the same camp.
Right, and I almost think this is wariness from that. I'm sure this could be presumptuous of me, but I almost feel like they've learned from that, and they're saying, so we're introducing this new major character, right? Graha's obviously going to be a big part of the story going forward, even after this expansion. I think certainly he's going to be one of our close companions, at least for a little while. And so they really, even though narratively he doesn't have a great deal to do with this expansion until the tempering stuff, sort of maybe thematically, which isn't quite true, because as a ruler he has some stuff to do thematically, but his theming is so much around Alag and around the First that I think they add this extra stuff in for Graha to sort of help him forward this crossing into the new expansion, into becoming such a major character in a long-lasting sense outside of the context of the First.
Well, and here's the one place I will not disagree, but I think add, is that I think the place where he thematically ties the hardcore in is when you get to Thule, because I think the idea of someone who believed in hope and holding the line is borne out in his role in 5.0 and especially in something like 5.3. But you don't have that moment with the Omnicrons and with Close in the Distance and with him getting to show that again. I mean, there are some couple moments throughout Endwalker, but it's like the hardest core power moment of that by far is when you get to that point in Ultimate Duel. So like you need something up front for him to be able to engage with. And also, it's important that characters aren't always just playing at fucking, volume 11 in terms of, like, you have to have small moments to make good characters, or to make great characters, I guess I would say.
Yeah, to make great characters, to make great narratives. I think we talked about that quite a lot in the sections after you first visit Thavna and after you first visit Sharlayan, where you go back to the Annex, and we talked about it a bit in the Moon, where these smaller, quieter moments allow the story to expand and to breathe and to grow.
Speaking of great characters and also big but small moments, we basically calm things down to an extent, get things sort of held at an impasse over in Razat Han for the most part, and then we cut to Estinian and Vritra in the skies above, fighting all of the Terminus beasts.
Yes, and I'm sure this is immediately apparent to most people, the philosophical and thematic significance of this moment. So, of course, we see this again with Bahamut and Tiamat, but the forgiveness offered by Estinian, even though Reacher didn't personally do anything to him. But of course, Nidhogg slew his family, and he was embroiled in a years-long war against the dragons. And so his ability to step into this situation to definitely not forget the trauma and the baggage of that time, but to move forward past it and to recognize Reacher as a person and to interface with him in the way that he does is a very meaningful part of the story.
Well, and there's multiple points of this story that pay off. Okay, cool, like a character's thing, a character's story, right? And this is one of them, but it's also a moment in which Heaven's Word is getting to be played off in Endwalker, because it's not only that what Estinian has been through allows him to offer compassion to Vritra, it's that I think you could make a meaningful argument that nobody else in the world would have been able to motivate Vritra correctly, because nobody could simultaneously understand both his role as, I guess, for lack of a better way, as man and as dragon. And so it's just, you get music that's so meaningful, but he's the only person that can convince Vritra that to push past his fears and to ensure that revealing himself would be the right thing. In my opinion. I mean, like, maybe you could say, like, oh, if Tiamat had showed up, or as Daya had showed up or something, but I think the one person who could simultaneously be someone who is a man of action, but have learned enough to be a man of compassion as well, as in the way that Estinian is just, it's good.
It is really good. And I also think that, you can say Tiamat would show up. I don't think that, I'm not saying that you do think this, but that wouldn't carry, that it wouldn't feel earned almost. And this moment with Estinian definitely does. And I really like your comment on how he, how he encourages him to reveal himself, because Estinian has seen what happens when the lives of dragons and men are intertwined and sort of just shrouded in secrecy and lies. And he knows, obviously, what Vritra did all these years wasn't a bad thing per se, but he knows what cost it can have.
Yeah. The other thing I think that's, I don't know, I wouldn't say easy to lose, but is the level to which Estinian has gone, and still is someone who is a pragmatist. So when the pragmatist is able to take their experience and argue for making a better world and like trying to forge a path towards that, it goes back to me in, I think 5.5 or 5.55, I think it's 5.5. But Estinian, when he agrees to join us and is like, I am, a pragmatist, but I look around you and I see what you have accomplished and I see your commitment to making the world better, and how can I not be moved? That even ties further back into when he gets to the Turning Mist. It's like, how can I deny the truth of my eyes, right? And so I love that it's not a part that's taking Estinian and like, oh, we're making him from a cynic to an optimist. It's better than that. It's just, there is a path forward and we can make it, and it's real. And I've seen it, and and I know you choosing to show yourself is scary, and you may be rejected, but I think it is the path towards a better world.
Yeah, and I think that also Estinian having, on top of his backstory trauma and all of the war baggage, I think that the fact that he walked to that line, consensually or non-consensually, when he was corrupted by Nidhogg and came back from it, is something that provides additional weight to this as well, and additional insight into Estinian's character.
Yeah, truly. The man who wields Gaebolg, soaked in the blood of Nidhogg and the armor of Ratatoskr given as a gift, and whose soul bears the scars and the taint, I guess, of Nidhogg and of a man. But we also get one of the most dope-ass hype lines that showed up in the trailer when Endwalker, which is just, "The hour's come, Vritra. It's all or nothing," which is just so good.
Yeah, it's really good, and it's paired, of course, with a really swelling music that is great, and the visuals around it are great with all the flying beasts. I forget what the boss is called that they're modeled on, but like the little harpy guys with the big.
Oh,
big
yeah.
eyes, or like the billions of those in the air around them. It has this real, Last Defender on the Walls type vibe, even though that's not necessarily the case. It has this, valorous, cheering defense type vibe.
And dragon and man standing side by side to hold the line against Oblivion. And then in the trailer, when you have, Emmett Silk, some of the fangs run by Tooth and Claw, there were those who stood in defiance of that fate. And then fucking portal from the sky opens, dragon star, like you have Estinian and Vritra comes. Oh, it's good.
It's really good.
It's good stuff. It's good stuff. Okay, moving on to the next cutscene and next part, we arrive in Palakistan and we help people get to safety throughout the region, which, as always, I love that we spend time. It's not just we're going on from, major task, okay, next boss, next story beat, but it's like, okay, making sure people are okay, making sure that the little folk are all right, doing what we can to hold that line is treated as important.
Right. No, yeah, absolutely. It's so often we mention how the small things in this expansion are, just the moments of going through life are what gives it value, at least in the context of this expansion, and the struggle. And I like that we're not just doing grand things, we're not just going to space and fighting a big bird lady. We're not just exploring lost worlds. We're also just helping villagers. And I know people throw the whole, we're the legendary warrior of light, why are we doing fetch quests? And there's some validity there in certain cases, but we're on the ground saving individual people here, and we need to do that to see the scale. It's the way to convey the scale, because when you see thousands of people dying in a battle, that's one thing, but when you see a family being torn apart or a village being destroyed and the individual sorrows and horrors of that, it has so much more weight.
Yeah, and it's partly because many of us can probably relate more specifically to it. So we end up getting people sort of secured over by the stone temple area. I'm forgetting its name off the top of my head, but we also get this moment here where it's the place where faith and belief as maybe not cure, but the way to kind of hold on in a world that's so filled with heartbreak. Because in this moment, we don't get, we saved everyone's children, we saved everyone's husbands, we get people who just, they're lost. They've lost. And how do you comfort someone enough to keep going when you've just lost everything in your world?
Right, exactly. The existence of loss, the fact that we don't come out of this winning every single aspect of it is really important. The tragedy, the horror, the fact that we're still fallible, as powerful as we may be, is really absolutely important.
Yeah, and right after we get everyone together and we're basically having a section where just people are wailing and I just lost everything, what am I supposed to do? You have people trying to hold not only to faith in a blind sense, but you have the quote, "Know this, my children, there's more ugliness than beauty in the world. To live is to suffer, to drink of calamity and drown in anguish, to toil and be tested, always and ever. It's a perilous path you walk. Death lurks in the dark, and is the sole promise at journey's end. You will tremble with terror. You will weep tears of anger and despair. But do not avert your eyes. See your life for what it is. Then you will see how the hardships make you strong. Every doubt reforges a scale in your armor. Every agony to temper your blade." There's something I really like about this, which is that it actually really emphasizes the darkness much more than just, and it doesn't say, and everything will be okay, and everything will be good, and there's more good. It's an acknowledgement that sometimes there's more dark than light, but hold to it and hold to the way forwards.
It's almost Nietzschean but hopeful, as contrary to what a lot of pop culture perception of Nietzsche is. And I believe it's Hydaelyn who delivers this line, isn't it?
Well, so it's interesting. So there's two things. One of which is that I'd also say it reminds me of a lot of Japanese Zen Buddhism. So I wonder if that's partly where it comes from. But there's implications we're given. Who I think Alfina or one of the people says that kind of sounds like Hydaelyn basically. But if you just pay attention to this, know this, my children. That alone, and then literally everything about it, both what we know of Hydaelyn before this moment and later, this literally could have come out of her mouth. But what's interesting to me is that all of the people there claim it is the words of one of their divinities of legend. So what that makes me wonder is that, did Hydaelyn ever show herself onto them at an earlier, them in Razat Han, or ancestors at an earlier point, or did some, warrior of light called to them through the echo, or?
Right. So, like you said, it is just, this is Vanar's philosophy. It just is. So that's undeniable, and the fact that it's pointed out diegetically as well it makes that even harder tonight. And I think the fact that it's perceived of as an aspect of the Thavnarian religion is really interesting. I wonder if perhaps there's some lineage to it. You know how we learn that the earliest societies of our worlds retained certain aspects of the original histories, fractured and shattered, but certain aspects. I wonder if that's what this is. I also wonder if, that there was probably someone in Thavner at some point, or at least that region, who had the Echo, or at least in some way was in contact with Hydaelyn to the limited degree that people before us, before Kryl, were.
Yeah, I think it's quite possible. And there's also multiple other points. I mean, even just with like the 12 and what we're learning about them, there's lots of points on Atheros' history of people taking powerful beings or beings that were literal and making them myth in some way. You can also look to the, fundamental religion of Thavner, of Razat Han, and like how it kind of really is just a description potentially of real people, of like the Archosodra showing up and just being like, oh, what are these guys, or about explaining Aura. Or you could also argue, you look at Nama and Azim and how there's relationships between them potentially and the Dusk and Dawn Worm, Bahamut and Tiamat, because they're the Dawn Father and the Dusk Mother. Or there's lots of stuff like that sprinkled throughout. So it wouldn't be the craziest thing to think that Hydaelyn somehow presented in some way to those people, and they treated her as divinity of legend. And we'll get later when Vritra shows up, someone's like, a divinity, like just by sheer scope and scale of what he is, which means that other dragons who may have presented themselves may have been seen as such.
Oh, absolutely. I 100% believe that. I would be profoundly surprised to find that nobody worshipped Midgard Summer at some point. And of course, Mericidia, although the dragons certainly weren't sort of the rulers of the continent, there probably was dragon cults, for want of a better word, over there.
Well, with how Bahamut and Tiamat were at least seen as, if not rulers, they were seen as like the adjudicators of everything. They were went to by the peoples in order to try to have an even-keeled rulership. But basically kind of like what Vritra has, frankly. I can't believe that there weren't people who, if not worshipped, at the very least, very much saw themselves as denizens or servants or any number of positions.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, gosh knows, we see that in Ishgard, a society so dedicated to opposing the dragons. Even in that context, people start to worship them. I think just by virtue of their nature, of their power, especially the great worms, I don't see any context, any social context, any anthropological context where the worship does not arise, or at least, some kind of mythologization. Well, I butchered that word. But no, yeah, and like you said, how culture and history and exchange changes beings, changes deities is a major part, or at least a through line in this game. You have the sort of curious and not fully expanded upon yet line that links Azema and Sephiroth, for example, two gods from very different cultures, from very different contexts, that share sort of a solar aspect and, of course, have the same sigil, literally the exact same sigil.
Yeah, moving on, we find Matsuya's friend, Mevan, just a little too late, but we're able to save her child, and she gets, to the last, she's running with her child and gets just grabbed by the head and thrown into the water. I remember the first time I saw that scene, not just being shocked, but also being like, I don't understand what killed her, but if you watch the cutscene, like, she is being grabbed by the head by a giant beast and being thrown 30 feet with all of the pressure being on her neck.
Right. Yeah, it made me wince. I went when I first saw that.
Yeah, it's rough. But we're able to get the child back, but they're basically cold. They're slowly dying, both because they're wet and also, what they've been through at that point.
Right. So this is where I'd like to talk about the Matsya mythological connection. So, Matsya is an avatar of Vishnu. He is a fish avatar, which of course links into Matsya as a fisherman, and sort of his main contribution in many sort of Hindu areas, sort of because it's such a diverse religion, is that so obviously the Vedic religions are cyclical. So a world will end and then a new one will start. And as the last one ended, Matsya is the one who sweeps in and sort of saves a child. And that child then later becomes the progenitor of our mankind, of us.
Oh, wow.
And just the associations with water, with fish, with fishermen, and then also his aspect as a savior and protector of children, specifically within context to water, because he's like saves it from drowning, is fascinating to me. Like that's it just that has to be intentional.
Oh, no question, right? This is like, you don't accidentally name a character that and then do all those things. But you just added such an extra layer to thank you, Niniri.
It's my pleasure. It's my favorite thing to do is do historical parallels.
Oh, I love learning new shit like that. But speaking of, his gauntlet is so heartbreaking. And you just wonder, can things really only get darker because he's being chased, he's all alone, the baby starts crying and starts giving into despair, and you're just like, at that point, maybe most people were like, oh, they're not going to actually do that. But like for me, at that point with Endwalker the first time through, I'm like, I don't know how dark they're willing to go. We just watched someone's child turn into a monster right in front of them and get stepped on. So like, who knows?
So obviously I was expecting, as that scene started to unfold, I was like, okay, Matsu's going to struggle with this. I don't know if he's going to succumb. But then when you see the child, the infant, start to succumb to it, I was like, whoa, that is heavy.
And then Estinian arrives and the Dragon Theme is played, and fuck man am I pumped, because the release of tension in that moment is just whew.
It's so good. It's sort of action movie-esque, but better than that. And it's almost like Estinian is given a chance to go back and save someone from what he went through. Obviously, the child has lost family members, but has also gained one in Matsu. I could just imagine us going back in 15 years to Thavner and Matsu is raising this child or something like that.
Or at the very least, kind of like an uncle.
Yeah, at least has some role in his life.
I think it's a side quest, but you actually get to help the child get basically a foster family, which I think is awesome.
Oh, I must have missed that one.
Yeah, I believe it's one of the like longer story side quests in Palka's Stand.
Okay, well, he's definitely going to be involved.
Yes.
Estinian, of course, grows up largely without a family. Is basically just shoved into the military-industrial complex. But he manages to save a child from that, and I think that is, even if not intentionally, is valuable in the narrative.
Definitely. Well, and also even just he is part of making, he was orphaned by a dragon now saves the child, right? It is like, it turns it. And the other thing I really like about the scene is they don't just use like dragon song or something. They use the flight theme from like the first mount that you would have ever gotten, and some other mounts is like just the general flight themes. I don't think it's Wings Aloft. I forget what the name of it is, but there's something so ethereal, but also hopeful. And they also use that for Midgard Summer quite a bit, but it also has weight to it, so it's such a really interesting choice at that moment.
Well, it's also got the significance in regard to Midgard Summer, because of course it's sort of a shared theme, right? As I understand it, it's the Flying Mount theme, but then it's also always been Midgard Summer's theme. So the fact that it's sort of trotted out here for his child as well, and then it also carries the flying mount symbolism, as of course Estinian is essentially using Vritra as a flying mount. Probably isn't the same word, but for simplicity's sake, we can say so. So yeah. I think that's definitely it works on so many levels, several levels.
And I love that Matsuya's first question is a divinity, and Vritra's just straight out the gate like, divinity, nay, but one who would deliver thee just the same. And we already talked about dragons and divinities, but like the fact that he immediately questions that. But I also love that Vritra has some just great like one-liner responses that don't sound like he's trying to like have a cool response, but are just kind of cool in their own right.
I mean, that's the key to writing cool dialogue, is making it feel not forced. And I think they achieved that with Vritra. The Flying Mount theme, by the way, is called Borderless.
Thank you. That's what it is. Yeah, I think Wings Aloft is the Garland theme.
That would make sense.
And before we continue onward, we get a moment with Alphino and Alice where I believe Alice basically is like, let's bury Maven because, like she deserves at least that much. And one of the things that goes along with it's the little things from earlier in, Garlemald, I think it's not just, it's the little things in terms of good. Because we're going to get in a section here, like the level to which the little things matter with like just a simple chai tea, right? But I also think that one of the things that I didn't realize Endwalker did quite a bit is the little things can be recognition of loss, right? The fact that we bury the Garlean girls who die in the snow, the fact that we take the time to bury these, to bury Maven, to give them just some amount of respect, even though it doesn't change the loss. I think those things mattering too is just as much part of the coin here.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, so much of Endwalker is about moving on or moving forward, perhaps, but it's never about forgetting what's happened. It's never about not honoring those who have fallen. As much as we may walk, we walk with the memories of those that we've lost, that we've, tragically had to fight and kill, that we've failed to save. And we carry that with us as we go forwards.
The journey isn't just the most recent step and the steps that come next, it's also the steps behind us.
Right, exactly.
I think the role quests all play into this in different ways. I think maybe most predominantly with the ranged melee, where it's ultimately the climax of that is the Dolmen burial service as a way for people to grieve those that they've lost. And we'll get into the role quest a little bit more in a little bit here, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's in the healer role quest as well. Not only of those that were lost, but also forgiveness, and also of almost grief for lost time, lost childhood.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And, again, no surprising no one, the role quests are all different expressions of a theme, just like what Endwalker is doing typically.
Yeah, absolutely.
We got back to Palakistan, and it's sort of the first bits of Ritra revealing himself to the people of Palakistan. It's kind of like a test run. And Nadana being like, oh, that's cool. Oh, you were Varshan. Oh, that all makes sense. Like, Nadana takes it pretty in stride, which is very Nadana. But there's also a line from Alfino that I really like that is about how it's strange that the skies above are aflame and it's ominous, and yet the fires that crackle around here in Palakistan offer comfort and warmth. And just like the same thing can be cruel or kind, a comfort or a fearful based on the context and the use to which they're put.
And I think that is allegorical to dragons. Particularly as they're being told in this moment, a dragon can be a symbol of safety and kindness, which is, of course, what Ritra is even learning about himself. I don't think he particularly even believed that about himself. I don't think he could ever conceive of himself as being thought of that on a wider scale. And of course, it can also be a sign of danger, as we see with Nidhogg. But the key is not what you are; it's who you are.
Yeah, what you do with it. Are you destruction or are you benevolence?
Right.
Yeah. And that's, like I said earlier, that's where we get sort of, we go around giving people chai tea, right? And it's, it's a moment of a small meal and it to help with recent wounds. And it doesn't make everything better, but it offers a little bit of comfort. And we see different ways in which sometimes that little bit to help people keep going in their darkest moment is all you need to get on to tomorrow and to take the next step and the next step after that.
And we've all had that moment, haven't we? Where an offered cup of coffee or just a hand on the shoulder is all you need to face seemingly insurmountable obstacles and sentiments and feelings. It can really just be something so small, but that shows empathy.
Truly. So we meet back up with Scions and Razat Han, and Vitra at last shows himself to the people there. And the Dynamis music starts playing, and the people accept him.
Yeah, it's a really sweet moment. And I think the use of the Dynamis music is interesting. It's almost hinting, right, at emotiveness and sentiment and true feeling. I definitely feel like it's not a hint that anyone's going to get, at the time, but it feels intentional to me. It feels like that was put in there for that reason.
Yeah, and I think it really ties it all back to the moment of the Elpis Flowers and Ultima Thule. Right, it will tie it forward, I guess. If you take every moment when that music plays beforehand, it's all very intentional to tie in what those moments feel like and what those moments mean to that moment there. And I think, and there are different emotions, because that there in Razat Han is more vulnerability and success and unity and working together. But then the moments when Dynamis music plays with Hermes, promising flower upon his return, right, upon the return to Medion, is a very different emotion. There's a melancholy and a joy and a personal spirit and a promise, right? And so it's like very much sentimental and emotions and good positive emotions, but different ones. There's a different nuance.
Okay, I just started to think about the flower field scene, and it's every time it gets me.
I'm gonna be crying when we get there and talk about it, because I have watched that scene at this point, especially for footage recording and editing for videos and stuff. I have watched that scene at least 50 times, and it never has not made me get weepy in some way.
Right. Honestly, the first time I ever saw that, like, it just took me out. It just like took the
Mm-hmm.
wind out of me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so good, so good.
I don't want to talk too much about my emotions at that point when I first saw it, but I will say it was what could be possibly, and then I saw it, and not only was I hit with like overwhelming emotion, but also what else could it ever have been? You know, like it was
Right.
the only thing it could have ever been. But yeah. So moving on, I really appreciate that the story takes time to really make Vitra not just a character, but like he has an arc in it, with which how much is going on in Endwalker is kind of wild. But like what we've been saying now, it makes sense, right? With even though his arc can seem disparate, it's really important to. It's just one more piece in the puzzle. You know, it still serves the function of the broader story, even though it could be like, why are we taking so much time to work on this dragon and their insecurities?
Right. There's quite a few like that. Obviously, some of them are really plot centric, like Fortuno's personal arc. Some of them are obviously attached to the plot and are important, but feel almost a little not sequestered, perhaps, but almost a little abstracted out in terms of pure plot, sort of, top down cinema sins. What is necessary? But they all serve to illustrate the purpose to build towards something greater.
Yeah, definitely agree. And this moment with Vitra also has me on about something that I've kind of been on about a lot lately in my own head, but it's really easy to think progress or the bonds between people or unity or working together or civilization or any number of things kind of like are just natural things that happen, but they don't. They happen because people worked to make things better or worked together, right? Like, any number of innovations or things that have made people's lives better came about because people fought against entropy and fought against, whatever the natural state of the world was in order to try and make things better. And so it's easy to see that where we're at now, or in this case, where the characters are at in the game now as a baseline, rather than the result of many people striving together to make things better. And I think this moment with Vritra also kind of, harkens onto that, which is that things don't just get better because they just happen. It takes effort.
Right, exactly. And I think that's a really important point to make. Nowadays, you see so many people who are just sort of misanthropic about the world, which is easy to fall into. We've all been there. Or at least certainly I have. I know you have, Elio. But there is, the world is a cruel and a hard place, but there is beauty, especially in other people, as much as it may seem hard to see that sometimes. People will always have and do and always will strive to help other people. Not every person, obviously, but
we wouldn't be here if they didn't.
Right. It's a really popular thing now on TikTok to sort of talk about it. But you see tens and tens of thousands of years ago when so many people conceive of the world as a brutal and cruel place, and humans were living in bands of like 20 or something people. But even then, you see signs that show concerted years and years, decades long effort to keep disabled people not only alive but healthy and thriving. Even early surgical efforts to sort of help people to live. People have always been doing this. People always will do this, and I see that in this game as well. What is it? There's that famous saying, "Hell is other people." Yeah, well, so is heaven.
Yeah. Yep. And that contrast is rooted here in, archetypical form. I mean, like literally Fandaniel or the Endsinger or any number of characters are that manifest in not just in like individuals in the real world who are the same, but like also that side of the human experience, right? But that's why it's important to recognize it as a side or a potentiality of some people to be not just the natural, somehow like the natural state is that level of utter rejection of the good parts of the human condition.
Right, and even then, and I don't think he's moralist anyway, but we talked at length, of course, about how as Fandaniel is sort of, taken out, there's hope in him, almost. Maybe not hope, but he's looking forward, and he's like, maybe you will win.
There's some part of him that maybe, I don't even want to say wants to be wrong, but there's some part of him for a moment that accepts he might be. And like that's like, I guess that's progress, right?
Right, yeah. Progress, well, anything's progress for Fandaniel.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to backstep from there. And there's a line from Alfino to Estinian here that I really love, which is just, seeing dragon and man work together surely would have put a smile on Ysael's face. And I love that he accepts that. And these two in this moment have, another small callback to the past, or another small callback to someone who's lost, but who the future they fought for, sacrificed for, got to come to be,
Yeah, absolutely. Eorzean would have loved to have seen so many things since obviously the whole payoff of Heaven's Ward, but also this definitely. Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm a huge Eorzean fan, so it's really nice to see, because they do several callbacks to her, of course, in this expansion. It's just really lovely to see it.
Yeah, and I think that goes along with one of the the motif ideas of like, you can't always change tragedy, but you can choose to fight for something, and if what you chose to fight or sacrifice for comes to pass, sometimes that's enough. Whether it be what Vana fights for, whether it be Hydaelyn fights for her dream of a place where no child has to freeze in the snow, or where dragon and man don't fight each other, and we're without her, but she knew exactly what she was doing when she forged the way for us to be able to get to Azys Law. And because of that, we made a better world.
Yeah, we did. And so many people did, just the people of Heaven's Ward chose to fight that fight alongside her every day they accept the new status quo.
Well, and speaking of white-haired Elzens, Fortunel arrives.
And we see the growth that has been pretty consistent within Fortunel throughout this expansion continue here.
Oh, it's interesting. I actually don't see this moment as so much growth from him. I actually see this more as like a moment where he gets to express in a very specific way, where he's not having to fight back against people potentially from his standpoint hampering what he's doing, to he getting to be earnestly exactly what he wants to be, which is, here's our solution, we're here to help, we will do anything we can. Like, I feel like this moment is very much sincere, earnest Fortunel getting to be the person that he wants to be, and gets to be enacting the plan. He gets to try to save. And I don't think it's because he wants to be the savior by any means, but I do think that this is the point where at last he can like throw down some of the veil of having to be the guardian of the project, and instead can just be there to aid.
Right, and that's what I mean by growth for me. The fact that he's able to put down that veil, the fact that he's able to offer that hand, it feels like he just got his butt kicked by his wife, which I'm sure is happening all throughout this expansion.
Yeah, and I feel like I don't think I recognize the level to which this scene is important, though, because I think getting to see him not have to be the guardian of the project, but instead facilitate hope and facilitate trying to actually like do the best thing with a bad hand possible, goes a long way towards showing, I think, his character in its full complexity, and that he is, I don't want to say a better person than he seems prior, but he's not. His stubbornness comes from a genuinely good place, and I think this is one place that really gets to exemplify that earlier on, rather than just later when we get the moment with the twins.
Right. Well, I almost feel like the blueprint for this moment is laid out by Emiliance earlier on when she talks about younger Fortunel.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I feel like that's leading up to this.
Yeah, that idea that not just adventurous, but like kind, hopeful, however you want to put it, man, exists, and it's not just like oh, it's still in there, you have to get under all the like cruft, but that he has had to not be that role. He has had to be a different role. He has had to steer the ship and make sure the ship has stayed on that course. But there is always the inclination to be, I think, younger Fortunel always exists within him. And I think you even see that when we get to the role quest later, where he is immediately willing to jump in. Or the fact that he shows up not only in Razat here, but later on the Magna Glacius, right? Like, he shows up right away. Like, he is there to like take action. He's not just a bureaucrat. He's not just the person directing.
Right. He's a man of action, as referenced previously, and he's finally allowing himself, or finally being given a chance, perhaps, to be that once more.
And after that, he reveals the moon moon plan to the people of Razat, and Vritra says, we'll make our plan, but like know that if anyone wishes to join them, you are all allowed to make your own decisions. But we have Nadana arrive to us, and she pitches that maybe the underlying mechanism of what is creating the Terminus Beast is Akasha. Because at this point, we don't know a Dynamis. But if you think about, there has to be something that makes up the Terminus Beasts. If it's not Aether, yes, because all the Aether's been obliterated, it has to be something. Ergo, Akasha makes the most sense, especially when how everything seems to be tied to despair and emotions.
Yeah, I think definitely as we see, obviously we've had the Akasha mild bit of exposition previously, and then as we see people panicking, they start to turn. As we see more and more of that, it becomes very clear what's happening there. And as we're doing the investigation to look for the blasphemy as well, that we learn of despair in that regard as well before the dungeon. So the player by this point probably has a pretty good idea that it's an emotive phenomenon of some kind, and we can link that back to Akasha and also to the flowers. But she lays it out for us really nicely. Nidana's a really nice addition to this expansion, as sort of a lore nerd for the lore nerds.
Yeah. Well, and also being like a characterized not that she's, I think this is reductive, but like a characterized exposition dump, because like there's points where she can bring up subject or convey information or lead you along the path, right? Because even just making sure for those players who may have not figured that out yet, having a moment where the scions need to figure it out and taking a breath and action to consider that, it also helps lead us on to what our next note will be, creating a plan going forward.
Right, and it's not bad exposition, like you said. They've done the show. They have shown us. They have laid out the clues for us. It's just they also need to kind of state it when it's this plot important.
Right. Sometimes a little bit of clarity goes a long way. Like sometimes it's important to be able to be very specific and clear, especially when you have something like Akasha, which at this point is nebulous, and even after you finish Endwalker is still somewhat of a nebulous concept. That making sure that you have some amount of specificity to hold on to does become very important.
Yeah. If you want to leave stuff like what the god of Scala is, for example, somewhat mysterious, then that's fine. But when it's the mechanism on which the plot hinges of this expansion, you need to state it.
Yeah. The flower fades, it breaks apart into dust. And that loss of the flower will kind of harken forward because, we're not going to need it for this next part. And then the re-arrival of it towards the end becomes pretty important, as we've kind of noted with the Field of Flowers later.
Right. When it does return, it serves a different purpose, obviously. To an extent, there's some thematic through lines, like the hope that Hydaelyn's contact gives us, and also the hope that or at least maybe hope isn't the right term for it, but whatever it gives, the catharsis perhaps that it gives to a certain bird.
It proves the spectrum of emotion, right? Like what the flower does is it proves the spectrum of the human experience, proves that emotion exists. And because it reacts to emotion and does so, it also, you cannot deny the truth of what it reacts to, right? The emotion is there. And so when that field appears later on, Emet-Selch has the line, you cannot deny that even within this, this place so filled with despair, there is hope. There is the full breadth of people's sincere hope and emotions and positive emotions, not just because if Ultimate Thule was nothing but just all the despairs of all these people and nothing else, the second those flowers came to be, they would have faded into dust, but they didn't. And so the symbol of what they are matters so much. And so it being set up as a response to all these different, many emotions throughout the story means that by that point, you should understand just what them existing in this place means, if this place is supposed to be nothing but the remnants of stars that have died's despair.
Yeah, no, you said it perfectly.
Sorry, I went a little long there.
No, I appreciate it 100%.
Yeah. So we are back in Razat-Han and we get introduced to the role quests, which is interesting because it's like, this is a good time to do it because this is the only place, like we're in Razat-Han, so it's a good place to introduce role quests. It's also like, there's kind of a moment to breathe-ish. But like also, I don't know about you, but I cannot imagine I didn't do the role quest while I was going through Endwalker because I'm just like, I'm too on this train. I gotta know.
So I did the first one, and then, I did one more when I was around like 98 or something, but I just couldn't keep it up. I couldn't sustain it consistently as much as it's a good thing to do. It's a really great pairing, but man, I was just so excited, especially once we hit Elpis. I was like, there's no turning back now.
Yep. That's part of I was like, I'm gonna continue on, and then by the time we got to Elpis, I was like, well, I'm not going back to do those for. I will also say, I think you can really make a meaningful argument to do them during the final days. I think you can. They even, I believe, adjust the dialogue a bit if you do them after the final days. And based on the fact that blasphemies don't immediately disappear just because the final days end, because I mean, like, just because the process of turning people into monsters ended doesn't mean that those that are still around just disappeared. I actually think in some ways a lot of them especially work really well as capstones to finishing 6.0. So I actually have I normally am like, okay, do things during, like you do Warring Triad before you go to Stormblood, blah, 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 or whatever. But in this case, I actually kind of really support doing role quests after, because I think they're a really good cathartic note about the past and moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to say. I think there's value both ways. Obviously, I only did it one way. I only did it mostly after. Not entirely, but mostly.
Yeah. I do appreciate that they let us choose.
Yeah, no, I think it depends on what you want out of it, because it can be a great companion piece alongside it. Or it can also be a pretty good refresher for the socio-political contexts that are going to be, well, have been, and are going to be very important going forwards. Afterwards, the thematic content of them is also a good spurring on point. I would do them before I do the patch, though, before I go on to patch content.
No question. Emphatically, you should do them before 6.1. They still make sense before 6.1, but you really should do them before 6.1.
Yeah, I definitely think so. You could do it during or after the base expansion, but you don't want to do it after 6.1. Do whatever you want to do. It's your subscription, but I wouldn't recommend it that way.
Yeah. I mean, like the same way that you could do Omega and Alexander after you do Shadowbringers, but you're going to be rewarded for understanding those when you go to do the twinning, or doing Omega before you do Endwalker, because understanding the Omicrons is going to mean a lot more if you do it ahead of time. So like in general, I would say do content for a thing before moving on, but also recognize your own way of playing a game. And if you know it's the difference between feeling like you just don't even want to keep playing, then, do what works for you.
Man, I can't even imagine doing the twinning without Alexander first. That's crazy. That concept is crazy to me.
I mean, but I feel the same about doing Endwalker without having done Omicron because of how much that matters in Ultimate Thule,
Yes, yeah. I feel like you're less lost, though. Like, you just won't get what's going on in that dungeon. But I think you wouldn't understand certain aspects of Omicron pretty well, but you don't get the full narrative weight of it.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I mean, but by the same token, when 5.0 existed, Crystal Tower was not mandatory. You could go through the entirety of Shadowbringers without ever having played Crystal Tower, which is still wild to me.
Man, no, I understand what they were trying to do with it, right? Like,
yeah,
obviously they've walked that back slightly now, and they are making certain content mandatory, which is, in my opinion, good. But I understand why people might not love it. But oh my god, that whole thing! The Exarch's whole quest line, the whole storyline is bizarre without doing Crystal Tower. Not that it doesn't work, but it doesn't work.
But it barely
nearly
does.
As good. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And then by 5.3, they're like, okay, this just makes no sense if you haven't, so we got to mandate it.
Right, exactly, yeah. 100%.
So after the role quest, which we'll probably go into more detail another time, but we return to Mams, and we basically start talking to the other Scions. And one of the things we get from Y'shtola is if you talk to her, she has the line, if the Forum truly has been spurred to action by Hydaelyn's prophecy, then is it not odd that the anti-tower was entrusted to Master Matoya, who bears them no love? No doubt she has a reason for this, and I would know what it is. I wasn't able to check to see if she has a specific line if you go there during your time when you're supposed to be in Elpis, and that explains it. But I think we had a pitch a while ago, right? Which is that once they felt like they had understood, and I think even Unfortunate talks about this kind of later on, but once they kind of talked to Hydaelyn from there, they instead started working on the Aetioscope, and also that she kind of went semi-silent.
Right. We know, of course, that she begins to get less vocal and less vocal, even to us. Of course, eventually she does go mostly silent with us. And, we see the evidence in the Aetioscope. The Aetioscope is plainly, if not a replacement for the anti-tower, alternative to it.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. And why Matoya was given it, I mean, she's a badass.
And basically squatters' rights. But I guess the thing I guess I don't know why I didn't just put these pieces together, but this was only within the past 15 years. The Aetioscope would have already been completed. This is basically just set up for hinting that there must have been another form of communication, basically, because at the point at which the anti-tower had become redundant, then we're leaving the Dravanian hinterlands anyways.
Right, and obviously it's very well cloaked in the narrative by this excuse of isolationism and of pacifism, which are true points. You know, they're not even lies. It's a cover for why they leave, but it's not untrue. These are matters that they care about. These are things that are true of their civilization, that are true of their diplomacy. So I guess the Sharlayans understand that the greatest lie is, you know, 3/4 truth.
I mean, there's a reason no one really questioned it. I mean, like, people thought it was a little weird, but no one really questioned it particularly.
It makes this whole storyline, this whole concept of what the Sharlayans' true intentions makes Louis Soir's character so much more interesting. Not that it wasn't before, but there's some real stuff to interrogate with regards to Louis Soir, because he must have known.
Yeah.
That there is pretty much no feasible way that he didn't know about the plan. And I think we discussed before a long time ago that he must have just essentially done what we do and say, when we find out, and say, okay, that's fair. I'm not going to stop you from doing that. I'm not going to obstruct it or do anything like that, but I have to go and fight for everyone.
Yeah. You know, or the alternative that the memory magics, when he would have, if he had left the forum, would have erased that information. That's one other viable alternative. I personally prefer the former rather than the latter, but you know, it's one thing that could have been.
I mean, even if that's true, he still left.
True. Yeah, he made that decision either way. Yeah.
Even if he didn't have that in his heart and his mind at the time of him doing it, he did that with that intention.
Right. He already made that choice. Yeah. And I love that Flo plays around the table, which is interesting choice in that moment. It's important in that moment because what this moment is an acknowledgement of how much we don't know and about creating a plan to move forward. But I think it's also relevant because we're going to soon meet with Hydaelyn, or with Vana. So it's, I think, relevant that this theme plays back up because it hasn't. I don't remember the last time it's played in the narrative, but it's been a little bit since that. We've had the Dynamis theme a couple times, but Flo doesn't play that many times other than, I mean, obviously versions of it in themes in, like, Sharlayan, right? Like, the You Were Brimith is a version of Flo.
Right, yes. Yes, it is. And Flo as a song is so much almost a parental love song. So it almost feels like we're being watched over, if that makes sense. Especially immediately after so much discussion of Hydaelyn's prophecy.
Yeah. And if you haven't watched our lyrical lore on that, and our other lyrical lores, I highly recommend you do.
I do too.
I know that I did not appreciate Flo nearly enough or nearly as much the first time I played Endwalker. I liked it, but I wasn't able to, I didn't fully follow every lyric. I didn't fully understand it. And so once I looked at it in specificity, it's now one of my favorite songs in all of 14 because of what it represents. Now, part of that is because of things that are particularly emotional to me, but it is, I would just say, like, it's one of those songs that I feel like warrants a review if it didn't hit you very hard the first time, or because if you pay closer attention to it, it has a lot more to it.
And that is so true of all of 14, well, most of 14's music. Elio's made an extensive list of videos about various songs, and I recommend that you watch them all, because if you like the music from 14, but you haven't looked deep into it, I recommend you do. It will enrich the songs for you. If you love the narrative of 14, but haven't looked into the songs much as a subject matter, I recommend you do, because it will enrich the narrative. They are very meaningful works of art.
Truly, truly. And it's really impressive that so many of them are bangers while also serving narrative function. Like, that is just impressive.
It is. And there are even some that serve as lore dumps. If you look at Sophia's theme, what's that one again?
Equilibrium.
Yeah, Equilibrium. That's just a big lore dump about Mericidia.
Yeah. Well, and the level to which Answers and Flow are, partners to each other, and Answers is, how to keep going in a world that's is as it is, and Flow is, a promise that though it is a hard journey and the world is hard, that there is peace at the end of it, and that you are cared for inherently, and there is someone watching over you. Like, there's just look, we could do an entire Endtalkers just on the music, and it would be multiple episodes itself. So
it would be several episodes.
Yeah. So let's just continue on. So, there's not a lot of positive look out of the gate. We don't really have a game plan. But the flower ends up being the key. Y'shtola mentions offhand, and then we remember what the Watcher said to us on the moon, that they referenced, Elpis, that the flower would be our guide and Elpis would be the key. So we figure out, wait, so it meant something to those of the ancient world. Who's the last ancient we know to be living? Or at least partly living? Elidibus.
Right, and it's so interesting that we go back to the emissary to learn this final key that we need to unlock the mystery. Both in terms of his duties, as at least has he. Well, no, just his duties in general. He was a speaker for Zodiac, and almost in that regard, a speaker for the past. So it is so fitting that we go to him.
A speaker for the dead.
Yeah. I mean, specifically, of course, Zodiac, considering what Zodiac is made out of. You're quite literally a speaker for the dead.
Yeah, and we have that plan. Those like Estinian are going to go on hunts. They're going to like fight the Terminus beasts. Y'shtola is going to go to Matoya, figure out knowledge. Alise and Alfina are going to go check on people. Everyone has a plan. And once everyone has a plan, it's either seek knowledge or hold the line. And then I believe Alfino reminds everyone that we're in this together. And no matter how we are all struggling, we are not alone. And that's always good shit, but it's really resonant at that moment. And then we also get the lines from Emmett Selk that, not at a new map, but here at the almost exact midpoint of the story. So ends the brief respite before the next revelation. Yes, so much left to see, where beginning ends and ends begins.
We're walking the end.
Yeah, we walk into the end. Yeah. So we return to the first, and it makes me sad that there's no real cutscenes for that. I mean, like, I feel like you don't want to take a bunch of time to, like, hang around in the first, right? Like, you got to get going to the next stuff. It's not... The point is not to be hanging around in the first for forever. But we do get to talk to a couple of characters. We get to talk to Lena. But there's an emphasis on Reen and her working towards the restoration of the empty, which is... I mean, awesome. I mean, it's awesome that we get that, reaffirmed, especially with, what we know from Patch, but also what were speculating for years, that the restoration of the empty is in and of itself maybe not something we'll ever witness in its fullness, but that it is possible tells you something very important about the world state of something like, let's say, the 13th.
Yeah, it is very, very relevant to what we're doing now. And on the regards of no cutscenes, I almost wonder if, as originally constructed, we just arrive here, we talk to Lena maybe, and then we just go straight to Elidibus. But then perhaps they came back and it enriched it and enhanced it, but didn't have time to record voiced cutscenes. And I don't think it needs voiced cutscenes. Like you said, the point is not that it's a social call. That's just the added cherry on top.
Yeah. And I suspect you are right. And also, with the amount of voice actors who you get in Endwalker who are not one-offs, I mean, even like Hori Boulder gets a voice actor, but it's just Vritra's voice actor. I would think that, like, okay, you're going to get Reen's voice actress, like, back for one scene, and Lena's. Like, the amount of headaches of just creating scheduling for a bunch of extra hands that are only going to be around for one scene could be not problematic, but it's just like the more things you add on, and also this was all being developed during COVID, and like you don't want to add those complications. So even if it was just logistics, I mean, that alone makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're a Guild Wars 2 fan, so you know well that they released entire patches without voice acting and then went back to add it in later. I got to thank them for what they do, which is really incredible work.
Reen also tells us that she's had visions of the final days. We explain what happened, and she's basically like, that's terrible, but also we'll hold the line here. You just go do what you need to do. And, I love that shit. Like, that she's been through it. She knows she can trust us. She has confidence in us. She's going to do what she can, where she can, for as long as she can. And other than that's all you really can do.
To be honest, the first is probably the best equipped to hold this line. They're probably better equipped than we are. Than our world, than the Source is, because they've been through an apocalypse.
They're used to battling for their existential survival.
Right. Not that the Source hasn't been through, what is it now, 7 apocalypses or so, but still.
Yeah, definitely. So we enter the Oculus, and we see a vision of our friends, and the journey to the first in Shadowbringers, just, like, I don't know for you, but then it had felt so long ago. Which, like, the literal amount of time that had passed between playing 5.0 and Endwalker for me was probably about 2 years or 18 months or something like that. But it just felt like a world away at that point, like, after all we had seen in Endwalker.
Yes, it really felt like it had been a very, very long time. I think we just forged such close bonds with the first, with the people on it, particularly with Reen. I think with Reen and especially Gaia at the end, that we just missed him, right?
100%. And we go to the system. I forgot to mention earlier, but Graha gave us his crystal so that we'd be able to access the system as it has part of his blood on it. And we find the Elidibus entity. And I just want to, before we get into the more serious part of it, I just want to say he's a literal ghost in the machine, like a literal.
Right? I mean, you're right. He is a ghost in the machine, man. Elidibus.
Yeah, this scene's another banger.
It is. He as a character, he was such a sleeper hit almost. He'd been sort of teased out for so long, and then his fight is very significant, and then his ending is just such a beautiful moment.
Mm-hmm.
The rains have come. That scene is one of the enduring moments of Shadowbringers.
Very, very much so, and it encapsulates. I feel like that and Emmett Silks are both different expressions of the same tragedy of the world unsundered, right? It is both remember us, remember that once we lived, and also, the rains have ceased and there's another beautiful day, but you are not here to see it. Like we get such a very human desires and tragedies from them, in different ways, and I just love that in this scene also the Amarot theme plays because that's important for him as a character, but also because when we arrive on Elpis, the Elpin theme is a version of the Amarot theme. So it's that like having that refresher of that at that moment. It's also musically important.
Right. No, I completely agree. And it makes sense on not just on the fact that the Elpis theme is a version of it, but also just on the surface level, right? We are going to the time of Amarot. We're going to a territory, which maybe isn't quite the right word, of Amarot, like a facility, maybe. Yeah, that's probably a better word.
An installation, a facility. That's usually what I tend to think of it as.
Yeah.
But without Lord Zodiark, he has no purpose. The souls of and specifically we get the souls of Zodiark returned to the star, which explains why Hythlodaeus is able to be summoned. Like that's one important, like there are, like for instance, we get the line that explains that two souls were returned from the first to the source, and those souls were Minfilia and Emmet Selk, which is never directly stated, but is the implication because Minfilia's soul is in the Aetioscope and Emmet Selk's able to arrive to us in Ultima Thule. But Hythlodaeus and all the souls that were a part of Zodiark, the Aether, I assume then, I guess since the souls made up his body, did not just return to the moon, but returned to the star themselves.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that is the only way to read Hythlodaeus being there, I think, and it's just the nicer the way to read it. I don't see any reason to believe that would be denied to these characters narratively, thematically, morally,
or lore, or in literal, I think the explanations.
Yeah, you don't need to bend any law to explain it. In fact, you need to do the opposite.
And we also get that. So this is really important. I think there's actually a couple things I want to talk on here, but the reason that Elidibus remembers the things that he does is not like plot contrivance. It's remember we gave him the soul crystals of the people of the different offices right before he'd passed, and when he held them, he remembered his friends. He regained the memories because that's what the convocation stones are. They are basically the seat of that office with memories of those persons stored within, or in some cases, Emmet Selk storing those memories of his own memories of these people within them. And so, because he was able to hold those, he would have had one of Elidibus's things during 5.1 through 5.3 is that he's been so committed to his duty, he hasn't bothered to try and hold on to the memories of those he cared for. So he's more like he's almost more of an automaton by the end. He can't even remember those he lost or what or why he cared for them and there's also a short story that explains that he refused to look at the convocation stones or touch them in the intervening millennia because if they truly mattered to him, either one, he wouldn't need those memories in order to hold to the duty, or two, it would be a painful tragedy to lose those memories not only once but again and again and again. So that was his rationale. But because he has some of those memories back, that's why he's able to be a little bit more knowledgeable when we confront him this time.
Right. Yeah. No, that explains why. And man, it's pretty rough how hollowed out Elidibus was by what he had to do. Obviously the strain on all of them was pretty intense. The heartbreak of Emmet Selk, the madness of La Habrea that was sort of inflicted upon him by the constant shifting of bodies. There's also some other baggage there that we're getting into now in raid tiers. And then, of course, the dehumanization of Elidibus.
Yeah. And just to go over this, because I think this is important elsewhere too. The Convocation Stone, I explained what they are. The way that they're used to... So, for instance, with Fandaniel, with the Sundered Ascians, there was a prior Fandaniel that they would have been destroyed, or maybe there wasn't, but regardless, the Convocation Stone of Fandaniel was given to the shard of Hermes' soul on the source, and that was Amon. And so when it was given to them, they were raised to the office with some of Hermes' memories. Now, in some cases, like with Gaia, you get Logriff, like the personality of Logriff is much stronger, or Metron. You get with some, usually the Convocation Stones work, and they make people aware of their position, kind of who they used to be, and their personality of the past when from the World Unsundered takes over more. But in Amon's case, one, there were so few memories of Hermes, but two, also, Hermes or Amon's personality was so strong itself that the memories of Hermes just weren't enough. And so Amon had all the knowledge of what it was like to be a Unsundered and how to function and that power, but he was still himself, only kept in check by the Unsundered, who once they were gone, there's nothing to stop him.
Yeah, I almost think it's an interesting parallel, but definitely not an identical parallel to Grahatia. And how Grahatia is obviously the Convocation Stones, although I've seen people throw this around, they do not just make you into the holder. Hermes makes that extremely clear, if it wasn't before. But it does change you as a person. We see that with Amon, with Amon/Fandaniel. He's deeply traumatized by it, actually, I would say. And we obviously we can see that Gaia and Logriff are enormously changed by it, and I think that's probably true across most of them. It's in a similar sense, of course. Grahatia, as we have him now, is not the Crystal Exarch, and is not. So I've already said this recording session, but is not the Crystal Exarch. Is not old Grahatia. He's a new Gestalt. And I almost wonder if there's a less direct, a less profound version of that involved with these Convocation Stones. I don't think it's emerging, but I think there's elements of that.
I absolutely think it is very, very, if not exactly similar. Yeah, I might even go further and say it is even more of a parallel. But I definitely think there's no way to not see it as at least loosely similar, because it's the same principle, right? You take his memories of the past. Effectively, what is the Auracite that you bring to him in the source later than a Convocation Stone? It is a container of his memories, of his ambitions, his goals, his dreams, all those things placed in there. And then those are suffused into this other person, and it creates someone who has the memories of all the things that Grahav the First has been through, that Crystal Exarch has been through, but was themselves a different person at that time, Just because if you take me at 18 and you give me all the memories that I have now, it doesn't make me now. It makes me them at 18 with knowledge of the future, with knowledge of who I'd become.
That is self-evidently going to be a transformative act, to whatever extent it may be.
Yeah. And speaking of duty, I just also love that Elidibus, we tried to thank him or say sorry, and he's just like, no, this is just my duty. This is what I'm supposed to do. We are partly responsible for Fandaniel. This is right. This is what I'm supposed to do. And I love that neither we nor the Amaratines really understood the final days, but we both came to similar conclusions. And we also find out that, strangely enough, Fandaniel was the one to uncover and figure out how it worked in the first place, which seems so at odds with the Fandaniel we know. That if it weren't for this earnest person of the past solving, deeply trying to save everyone and figure things out, there would have been no one. Like, they wouldn't have even started to know what was going on. And yet Fandaniel also caused it. So, what amount of change was there between, the Fandaniel of the past, of Hermes, versus this incarnation that we know now? And it's what we just talked about.
Yeah. And we have, I think that same exact concept is also touched upon by the Watcher while you're on the moon. You also get these implications of, wow, this is not the Fandaniels that we're looking at here are not the same person, at least in the direct sense. It really piqued my curiosity. Not that the entire game wasn't at this point, but it definitely helped with that.
But yeah, the idea that Hermes is not Amon is like, just the amount of time that's spent on it before you ever even meet Hermes is really interesting. And we get, a very, very, very important line where where Elidibus has a moment where he's like, wait, I saw you there in Elpis. And is his confusion based on the fact that he saw us in Pandemonium and that Pandemonium isn't required? Is it something else? I mean, my read on it has definitely been that it is because Pandemonium could or may not have happened. And that's why his recollection seems hazy and they don't want to make it mandatory. So, but also it could just be that because his recollections are hazy in themselves, and also the events of Pandemonium and our time there with Themis, there's going to be a reason that he does not remember us. It could be any number of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the circumstances of Elidibus as they are enough of a reason for him to be confused.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he's forgotten so much, he's lost so much, is a good reason for him to have that confusion, to have that forgetfulness in that regard. And if you don't do Pandemonium, and if you're really invested in the story, why are you not doing the raid tiers? But if you don't decide to do Pandemonium, then it's just a cool little, ooh, maybe he's this person, maybe he's this person.
Yeah.
Or maybe he just sees us around. And if you do Pandemonium, of course, it's fantastic foreshadowing for who is very clearly Elidibus.
Yeah. Truth that fills his heart and kind of shows how few memories he has. But I guess, okay, I'm going to take this time to do an Elio's aside corner and kind of explain time travel in 14, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions around it. Time travel, as it exists now in 14, is all fixed loop. Now, there are branching timelines, but those are part of a fixed loop, and allow me to explain. In order for the 8th Umbral Calamity timeline to happen at all, which is this branch off of our timeline, and we know that when people went back from the 8th Umbral Calamity timeline back in time to now, it did not get rid of the 8th Umbral Calamity timeline. It continued to exist. But in order for that timeline to happen, that branch, Hydaelyn has to do the things that Hydaelyn does in order to create the world as we know it. Hydaelyn only does what Hydaelyn does. Vana only becomes Hydaelyn if we go back in time. And when we go back in time, our present does not change. Ergo, everything exists in a fixed loop. In order for us to go back, we have to have gone back.
Yeah, basically.
Alexander is also an example of fixed loop time travel. The only indication that we get that it has seen other timelines are not that it has traveled through time, but that it has run calculations about what it thinks that will happen if other variables come to pass. So that version of time travel is also fixed loop. As far as I'm concerned, the only ways time travel have been shown to exist in 14 are all within a fixed loop that has to operate in a closed system for them to even come to pass in the first place.
Yeah, pretty much. It's not as complicated as it makes itself out to be at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that's also why us going back into the past was already part of us going back in the past. And so that's why pretty much anything and everything we do in Elpis doesn't really affect much, because even the fact that Elidibus says, before we've gone, I remember you, shows that event already would have taken place, So it's all within a fixed loop. This has been Elio's time travel lore corner. Hopefully I won't have to do this again, and I look forward to the comment that manages to create a very interesting and niche argument as to why I am wrong. That will be the better part of 7 paragraphs long. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, I, for one, Elio, think that your discussion really disrespects the Duskwights, so...
We're not getting into that, We're not getting into that, Niniri. We are not... Oh god, not again.
War flashbacks. So he gives up his soul, right?
Yeah, we discover. I mean, it's probably already apparent if you haven't figured it out yet, but he's one final sacrifice, his soul, for a one-way trip to the world unsundered. I mean, it's not literally one way, as we can come back, but it's a one-way portal at least. It's the creation of that ability. And so kind of bouncing off of that, I really love Elidibus' final soliloquy. I think I'm just going to play it in full because it's just really... yeah.
Well, Hydaelyn, I take my leave of you. Yours is the mantle of the last of us. May you have the joy of it, the burden, and the solitude. It falls to you now. You and your champion to save our star.
Now Hydaelyn is the last of the Unsundered, so she has the mantle of last of them, and especially once she's gone, we, her children, are the inheritors of her duty, of their duty. We remember that they once lived, and we live on. And then it's just like the final line that he says, right? Now go save our star. So let's save our star.
Yeah, and it's so I have several thoughts about this. For one, as necessary and as almost cathartic as it is, what did duty not take from Elidibus until the very end?
Yep.
Every stitch of every moment of his life, everything he had to give, and everything that he couldn't afford to give was given for us, for his own people. It's pretty sad, but also the idea of stewardship of the star and of passing on memory and of duty is something obviously that harkens back to itself.
And harkens forward.
Well, it certainly doesn't, yeah. Well, harkens forward in a backwards sense. Time-wise. Yeah, so it definitely feels like a link in that regard, which makes sense considering that Emetzelkis shows up in the battle against Elidibus, and also that they were the comrades for so long. As much as Elidibus, that is, was sort of detached in a strange way from it.
I also love that. I don't know if it's the first time in Endwalker, but I think especially it's the strongest first moment of that idea of passing the torch that is going to start here, and it's going to go on in Elpis, it's going to go on in Ultima Thule in Emmett's lines to us, and from Vana as well when and the fight with Hydaelyn, but which ultimately makes that final moment during the credits, the walking past each other, right? I think hit a lot harder when because it's not just that element that they threw in at the end like that. It's something that is textual, that passing of the torch. I mean, I don't want to go into it too hard because one, it'll make me cry, and two, we're not there yet. But that you're allowed to say to Hydaelyn, it's okay. We've got it from here. You don't have to just hold out the torch. We've grabbed hold of it, and we are now going to walk forward with it.
Oh man, now you got me thinking about how just like every stitch of Elidibus was given, so was Vana, and the parallels and the mirrored circumstances there. But yes, no, you are right, and the passing of the torch is not something new to 14. We should say, it's a major theme in Stormblood. It's a major theme in maybe less of a major theme, but it's definitely a theme in Heaven's Ward.
It's Reen's story ultimately too, in Shadowbringers.
I mean, it's so many of the natives of the first story. Lena's story at the end of Shadowbringers as well.
Yeah, and I think that one of the comforts you can take, though, goes along with what we were talking about with Flo earlier, though, and even Elidibus gets at this, but he may be giving all of himself, but what he is will return to the star, and ultimately the end of his duty, even in the world unsundered, would have been to return to the star, right? So he will get his ultimate end. Will be the same that it would have been in a world without the heartbreak. And I think there is, if not for yourself, in his perspective, to take some comfort in that.
There is comfort in it, yeah.
Yeah. And same for Hydaelyn, right? Like, they get to return to the star and be part of new life. And that is to them, that is the end of their duty. And so again, it's not that it's not melancholic, it's not that it's not heartbreaking in some sense, but I think at least there's that. At least at the end that they would have wanted is there, for if not the outcome of the rest of the world, in the case of Elidibus, right, who I'm sure would have rather just had his friends back. But the other thing is that Elidibus uses the term the Promised Land, and not to flash too far forward right now, but that is a term that is used by a certain antagonist of 6.3, and the way in which that antagonist uses it, I think, is very interesting, and I would pay close attention to, especially how it harkens onto how the term the Promised Land and what the Promised Land is for Final Fantasy VII, let's say, and how it usually refers to the Ethereal Sea itself.
Right. The Ethereal Sea, and also it almost always contains primordial ancestral connotations as well.
But we walk through the portal. We walk through the portal onto the unknown, though we know we're the portal onto Elpis, onto Hope.
Man, one of my favorite parts of the game. This is going to be an exciting next episode.
So I guess we're going to start winding up here before we head out. But do you have any final thoughts about this section that you want to hit on?
It's really interesting as when we talk about in more modern content, when we talk about the Scions as no longer being a thing, of giving back the reins almost of protection, although we're still there, of course. It's interesting that in this moment we're doing much the same. We're leaving the scions, but we're taking sort of the protective element away. We're off to do something else, and we're letting people fend for themselves isn't the right term, but
Hold the line for themselves.
right, exactly.
Definitely. It's I feel like we're obligated to say this as we have so many times, but it's a pretty good story, guys. It's a pretty well told story.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty exceptional. It's. I mean, I would have to say the Shadowbringer story, especially I love the patches. Don't get me wrong, but especially the base Shadowbringers. No, the base Endwalker. Sorry, sort of content, launch content is the best MMO story content ever. Yeah, I would say that with confidence.
I mean, like, I agree. I think one, your mileage may vary about like the personal things that hit you hardest, right? And I think the other thing you can say in defense of something like Shadowbringers, whether you want to say it's better or whatever, is that you don't get Endwalker in a vacuum, And I think that's part of the reason that a lot of MMO stories also have, not all, because many have succeeded in this in different ways, but like a lot of times when they'll struggle because they are too isolated from each other, other than maybe carrying characters over and not taking full advantage of, the continuation of prior stories, not just of singular events, not just singular characters, but
Garage.
I wasn't trying to call out WoW, because WoW has sometimes succeeded to an extent. Like, it's not, but also, sometimes it struggles. And maybe it'll get better. Maybe it seems like it's on the track to be trying to improve that.
I've heard it's getting better. I still won't give them my money yet, but I've heard it. I've heard they're making better content.
Yeah,
So good for them.
Good on them. Yeah, I guess not to date myself, because who knows if we end up changing up some of our scheduling. But in general, don't forget that we are on the Monday, Tuesday streaming. We just finished Shadowbringers and we're going through Eden, so we're getting close to catching up. We're probably gonna finish Endwalker before me and you finish Endtalkers if we don't work our asses off.
Big time we are.
Yeah, we put out a video every week. We put out some interesting videos recently, some 7.0 theory stuff. I've got some more stuff that I want to come out before in the lead up to FanFest, because exciting times ahead.
It is exciting. It's very exciting. Well, everything's so exciting when it comes to this expansion for me.
I guess we said what we need to say for now. Shall we head on out then, Niniri, my friend?
I think we shall.
Okay then. Well, thanks for hanging out with us, guys. I've been Elliot Forceron.
And I've been Niniri.
And stay safe, Archons. Thanks for watching. Hey all, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, praise the 12 by giving it a like and comment, or by subscribing. It goes a long way to helping the channel. Don't forget, new videos every week, and if you want to engage with us further, why not check out our Discord and Patreon in the link below and become a part of our community. With that said, see you around, fellow Archons.